got a very smart group of people here. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Have been for a while. Immediately to my left is Eric Carvin, the social media editor of the Associated Press. John Keefe, conveniently right next to him in the order of the product manager from Quartz. Then I have Penny Riordan, director of digital audience engagement from GateHouse Media. And finally, Rob McCracken, director of digital solutions for the EW Scripps company. We're going to talk a lot about technology, specific new technologies that are being used to reach younger audiences right now. But I want to come at this first from the audience perspective themselves and kind of define who they are and get a sense of the preferences of this audience that we're talking about. So as a sort of roll call question to begin with, each of you, I'd like you just to tell me briefly, just in order from Eric on down, one salient characteristic about millennial audiences that it's essential for media today to understand.
I can start, and I would say that one thing that always stands out for me is, and I try not to be too categorical about generations, which I know is tough with our title here, but younger people tend to be more sort of grazers of news and information in different places and less committed and loyal to particular brands, or in some cases even necessarily aware of particular news brands. There are exceptions. There are some new news brands that are of a lot of interest to young people, but in many cases they care more about the platform where it's being delivered or the people who shared it and caused them to see it, as in their friends or the people they trust.
Which
so I think that's a characteristic.
The conflation problem that Pew has documented that kind of speaks to
Right, yeah, definitely.
John?
I would say probably that these generations are more connected to the global economy and the world in general than you might expect. And they're also getting news and information via other channels that you might not expect. And some of what we've been addressing at Quartz through conversational interfaces, apps, Facebook Messenger, things that you probably aren't considering, but that a lot of your audience is using.
Penny?
So echoing what Eric said, I think just whatever platform they are on, so you see this with Snapchat, it's just, you know, where are you spending a lot of your time? You just expect everything to come to you, and I think that's still, you know, a challenge when we're like, why do people not go to www. or turn on the news or something at the end of the day? And the other thing is they're just looking for fresh presentation types. I really think millennials want better design. They're looking for something, you know, that is mobile first, that really works well on their phone because they're spending a lot of time on their phone. So we really have to kind of be fresh and creative with how we deliver storytelling.
Rob?
I'm going to go at it from a different direction. I think one of the things that we need to be aware of with millennials and younger today is that they are increasingly more comfortable interfacing with media and technology through voice. So platforms like Alexa, Google, Siri, etc. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Okay, so that's a snapshot of who we're talking about. Now, I want to drill into this a bit further. So Eric, let's start with you. At the AP, what are you finding are some of the more effective platforms and approaches in interacting with millennials and younger audiences generally? And then what are, at the same time as you're interacting with them, what are the concerns that you need to navigate and be mindful of?
Yeah, so we have a lot of challenges that sort of underlie all of this in a place like AP, because obviously we're primarily still a wholesale news organization delivering news to, you know, a lot of people in this room and others, so you can put it out to your consumers. And so connecting in that way to any generation is always a challenge. But there are a few things. I think we need to think about the format that things are produced in order to catch the eye a little bit. We think a lot about how we produce video in terms of how people under 40, say, would be interested in consuming that, and a lot of that has to do with adapting to the particular platforms. You know, making sure that you get to something really interesting within the first 2 or 3 seconds of your video, or no one's gonna really want to consume it. Thinking about whether you need text on screen because of silent autoplay. It's a lot of sort of technical things like that, but also, you know, right now we need to stop thumbs that are moving. You know, we need to get them to stop and to pause on something. And I mean, this is something I think crosses all generations, is that people don't really want to really lift a finger to do a whole lot in this world, and so you need to sort of bring it to people a little bit more. And so now our strengths are still in what you might call the sort of legacy social networks, if we can call them that yet. Facebook, Twitter, places like that. But I think still within those environments, there are ways that you can approach content differently. And an example of this is you look at a place like Now This, which produces like really great social-focused video. And what's their most successful platform? It's actually Facebook, the place where millennials supposedly don't want to be anymore.
Most people only know Now This from Facebook.
Right, exactly, and they do that quite well. And their audience is very young. So, and it's because they do things like, they start the video with the best piece of content they have, and then they go back and tell the story, And if they can't, and if they don't have a visual they think that's going to stop somebody's attention, they realize, well, maybe this isn't the video for us to do. So we've been learning a lot from some of those startups and combining that with some of our own strengths in terms of our own access and being able to get the content from all parts of the world and trying to produce some different types of video and experiment with them in social spaces. The place that, and we'll get to this later I'm sure, the tough nut to crack for us is how to break into the spaces where people are, and younger people are increasingly moving, which is more private spaces. Things like everything from Facebook groups to Snapchat to WhatsApp to a lot of things where they're kind of hiding and trying to look for some sense of privacy in their world, and that's sort of the next step in the challenge, I think.
And do they have a more acute sense of privacy, you think, than other generations do? Is it any more sharply honed?
I think some do. I mean, I think I think that there's a reason that a lot of people flocked to Snapchat where everything disappeared. Because I think that they weren't necessarily thinking this is going to affect my job prospects someday, but I think they may live life in a more fleeting way in some cases, and not be thinking about sort of burning things into sort of into the tablet of life, but. This is all extremely generalized, and I want to keep coming back to this point because there are a lot of ways that millennials are like everybody else, and we'll come back to this later. One thing I found when I was at ONA, which I'm actually on the board of ONA, and when I was at the ONA conference this year, a lot of people are talking about email there, and that a lot of young people are interested in returning to email, and newsletters are becoming very popular because of a little bit of a backlash against social and wanting to find safer, more private ways to communicate.
Mm-hmm. So Penny, you're here representing newspapers, the only
Yes.
newspaper person I believe in the room. And I can make a lot of newspaper jokes, which I won't at all because I believe...
Are there broadcast jokes? Can I make
there-
those back?
There are.
But I will say, I think it's safe to say that the newspapers aren't necessarily thought of these days as the go-to news source for millennials per se. So how do you build a relationship with younger audiences, given that comes anywhere near the kind of relationship that their parents and their grandparents had with that medium?
Yeah, sure. I mean, social is a big avenue for us, and I think just about anyone here, or anyone in the news industry, we're getting probably roughly a third of our traffic, refer traffic through social. We've have some markets that have done Snapchat, and of course the challenge given that we're in kind of small to medium-sized metros like Columbus, Providence, is really, you can't get undiscovered. So we would really just kind of push that stuff out through Twitter or Instagram, or sort of share or let folks know, hey, we're on Snapchat. So you really have to work to build that audience organically. And there were plenty of people in our newsrooms that were interested in Snapchat. I'm assuming all of you have millennials in your newsrooms. Like they're working in your markets, and they were eager to be on that platform. I think the challenge is just the ROI sometimes on emerging platforms, probably the same the AP feels. We've actually experimented with private Facebook groups. There's been a lot of coverage around that. I know the Boston Globe had that article in Neiman Lab that talked about like a subscriber group, and we've done that in a few markets as a way to get readers to connect with each other. And I think that's almost the biggest untapped opportunity for engagement in the future, and just getting our readers to connect to us more, is saying, hey, you're all living in the same town of Peoria, Illinois. You read the newspaper. Why don't you all talk to each other about story ideas? And that gets to more of that private space that I think some people are craving. They don't they may comment on a Facebook page, or a Facebook post from the Journal Star in Peoria. They may comment on an article page, but they might be willing to have a more meaningful discussion in a private space. And I think as newsrooms looking to engage with our readers more, we have to be that avenue for them. We have to be that channel.
And do those private groups tend to be ever topical?
We've mostly stuck to just like brand and market, but I think they have the potential to be. I think in next year we'll be adding more topical ones.
And we've also talked about your company's done some experimentation with creating some niche brands, like you have Unravel in Sarasota, Florida. So how's that working?
Yeah, so Unravel was a millennial-specific brand that we created in Sarasota, Florida, and that's actually more, I guess all of Florida is really retirees, but like Sarasota is like really, really exclusive retiree community, and it seemed like the worst place to launch a millennial brand, but we had some folks there that were really wanting to reach out specifically. So it was "We Unravel the News, so you don't have to" was the tagline, and it was a standalone website, Instagram, Twitter, everything was different from like the Sarasota Herald Tribune newspaper brand, and they really partnered with young professional groups in the community. So their coverage was topical in kind of the non-traditional beat structure. So they covered a lot about like renting, rent prices, and did like housing surveys around, how much does it cost to live in Sarasota? Can you buy a house? And all these millennial things, that's not really like a public official speaking or a beat, but it's a topic that like if you're a millennial and you can't buy a home in Sarasota, like everyone talks about rent. That's what you talk about. So the biggest lessons that we learned is, I was actually talking to some folks on Friday in preparation for this about, what are the things that they learned in Unravel, because some of the folks that were working on it have left and have moved on. And I think the big thing is you almost have to go even more off the grid to connect to your audiences. They relied on like the Young Chamber of Commerce, which is probably like the more involved people in Sarasota, but that's still a traditional like community. Those are the people who are already plugged in. So how do they, how could they harness kind of those fringe groups or interest groups in the community to really get those connections more?
So John, let's switch to you. Quartz is one of the first media organizations to use bots to communicate with readers. Tell us what the thinking was behind this, and for those of us not initiated, how does it work? How do they work?
So our most famous example so far is our app. So Quartz started 5 years ago as a mobile-first site and service. So it's not based on a TV station, it's not based on a newspaper, it was designed to work on mobile. This was 5 years ago when mobile wasn't how we got most of our information, it now is. So there was no app per se initially. Then we decided to make an app. But this app isn't like what you probably have at your station or that you've seen. It's very much like a chat app. In fact, you open it up and the bot starts talking to you in little chat bubbles and gives you the day's news in this sort of conversational format. You have the choice between diving deeper into this little story or going on to the next one. We have animated GIFs, we have emoji, we even have 3D objects in AR in this little app, and it's all served up in this sort of chat format. Very quick, we really respect the reader's time, and then they're on their way. It also gives us access to provide push notifications to them, which we also do. So that is how we decided to start trying a different way to present news to people who are on the go, who might prefer this kind of method for getting information. This year we started the Quartz Bot Studio, which I work in, and where we are taking that sort of to the next level. So if you use Facebook, you can chat in Facebook using Messenger, and you can chat with your friends and your colleagues. But you can also chat with bots, and we are experimenting with how we can create conversations with our audience using backends that act as these little robots. The secret to all of this is that up until this point, all of those words written by the robots are written by really, really talented people. So the bots are actually fed by really great writers and editors who write in this format. We're also experimenting, though, with ways we can navigate people through that material using what they say back to us. So interpreting their language, using the computer to figure out what people are saying and navigating them to the right content. And so then that's where things get a little bit more sci-fi, and you have computers serving up some of this information. But at its core, we actually put a lot of faith in our writers and editors.
But so this strategy has branched off in numerous directions for Quartz. I mean, you have journalist-facing bots that you built in part with Knight Foundation funds, and then some niche bots. There's one for Stranger Things, the television show, that we'll talk to you about that. So how, based on the use case, how is the strategy evolving now?
So you're right, it's very experimental right now. We're trying to figure out what works. We're playing with, we're talking here about voice interfaces like Alexa and such too. Right now we are looking to the new year for developing more ways that we can interact with folks, whether it's through Facebook Messenger or other chat formats, meeting people where they are. We also have email products and other products. What's neat about Quartz is that I don't know how many of you have product teams, but I would venture to guess that if you have anybody who's doing product, the chances are that they don't report directly to the editor-in-chief or the editorial side of things. Quartz was built that way, so the products, whether they're bots or the email product or actually the website, which is also considered a product, those all report up to the editor-in-chief. They are editorial products first. And so it brings a different flavor. We're much more in touch with our audience from the very beginning of building some new product, whether it's a bot or a site.
And you were saying just before we came up here that it's a decentralized staffing too, that's kind of woven, that this isn't just one team siloed off building these things in isolation.
Yeah, the Quartz was founded by people who come from mainstream media organizations, big ones, and not only did they decide to make something that was mobile first and brand new, externally facing, but internally facing, the entire structure is completely different too. It's not this top-down sort of hierarchical thing that we see at newspapers and TV stations. I worked at a newspaper and a radio station. I know it well. It's a much flatter organization, which is tricky because there are now 200 people there and more working there. So there has to be some hierarchy, but it's an incredibly flat organization.
So voice has already come up a couple of times. The futurist Amy Webb has been extremely emphatic that voice is going to be the most important platform going forward, and that soon enough it's going to become our primary computational interface. In the meantime, we have the vanguard platforms like Amazon Alexa, Google Home, Apple's product coming out early next year. It was pushed back, among others. Rob, what is Scripps doing right now on these platforms? And what are you learning about your audience there?
So we're learning a lot. I was fortunate enough in January of 2015 to get my hands on what was just then called the Echo, a couple of months before it was released to the public. And I got it home, set it up in my kitchen, turned it on, and very few skills at that time on the platform. But lo and behold, one of them was NPR. So I activated the NPR skill, and I immediately thought, well, we need local news, and we're pretty good at that. So within a few months, we contacted Amazon, and our dev team worked with them, and we soon were testing about 9 of our markets using the Alexa text-to-speech engine. We now, fast forward, and I'll talk a little bit about the results, we'll fast forward to today, all of our markets deliver local news in the flash briefing format on Alexa. Half of those markets are actually human narrated. We work with a company called Rivet for the markets that we can't produce ourselves. We're hopefully going to get to where we produce it all ourselves. And the other half are text-to-speech. But the results that we got, we launched before Christmas last year. And what we saw is, for those of you who are on these platforms, you're going to see in your data, you're going to see a huge spike in November and December for usage, and it's probably going to trail off. It did that for us, but we are already back up to the levels that we had last year around the holidays, which is in some markets 60, 70, 80,000 listens. for each of our flash briefings.
Can I get a show of hands out there? How many people have one of these devices in their home right now? A fair amount of you.
Can I ask? Oh, I was going to ask another question.
Go for it.
How many of you have Alexas and have kids? All right.
So you're going crazy.
Yes or no that the kids use these very well? Yeah. Everybody who has it is nodding. Children and teens have no problem talking to their machines.
My kid, when she was 2 years old, knew how to use one of these things, and we didn't even have one. We had to actually really figure out where. We were in someone's home, and she said, "Alexa, play Wheels on the Bus."
Well, you're going to think magical. I have
magical.
a little bit of an agenda, but I just want to share a few quick points about why you should be there. And this is from Edison Research, Jacobs Media, and Experian. 18% of U.S. households own one or more smart speakers right now, and a majority of that group own two or more. Gartner predicts that number will be 75% by 2020. That's 2 years, 75% of homes. 65% say that they wouldn't want to go back to life without their smart speakers. And the third, who wants to guess what the third most popular use for owners of an Amazon Alexa is? Get the news. That's number 3 of all the things that it's used for, to get the news. And 66% of Amazon Alexa owners use it for that. 28% of smart speaker owners say they listen to more news than before when they didn't own a smart speaker. So the point, if you're not experimenting at least on these platforms, you need to.
So let me put this question to all of you then. What do you see as the most likely viable use cases of this? And I said the word vanguard before because really it is just the first wave. I mean, this technology may change enormously. But right now, as you can see it, what are some of the next use cases? Anybody take
I think we're still starting with the first use case, which I think is going to be important for a long time, which is getting quick updates on the news. I mean, I think that's going to be job one, and that's something we're kind of excited about at AP because we have a lot of that. And one lesson I think that comes out of voice assistants and also out of bots to an extent is think about these technologies that are on the vanguard and think about what you already have, what kind of content you already have, and what kind of resources you already have in your operation that might be able to be adjusted or reconfigured for it. I mean, and the example that we have is we have a product that we call story summaries, where every single story that we put out, and we put out a lot of them, as you know, has a little summary at the top. And guess what? Those sound pretty good read out by Alexa. And so, and that was something that we originally created with other things in mind, you know, like broadcast customers and other directions for that to go. But you know, think about how that can be a fit. I think it's going to be a big breaking news model, and I think it's going to be also it's going to become more of an interactive type of news model too. I think you're going to see more and more of like what Quartz does in a voice activated setting, which already exists, and I think because of the younger people we're talking about here. There's more of a comfort level, I think, in interacting with the machine.
And consumers are getting more comfortable with particularly the Alexa interface and the Alexa interaction for voice. And you know what they're coming out with, they've just come out with recently, is the Amazon Alexa Show, which is basically a TV that you talk to, and it's really small right now. And you know what it's going to do? It's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it becomes potentially the entire wall of your kitchen or whatever. But the point of that, again, is you should start testing with Amazon right now and start embracing this technology so that you can be a part of that when it does become a full audio-visual interface.
We may have time to circle back to voice, but I want to take on another technology that seems poised for a great leap forward, and we're going to hear a little bit about later today, augmented reality. And with iPhones now becoming more equipped to handle that, this question is also for anybody to jump on. Where do you see augmented reality having an application at your news organization in the near future as well? In some way that younger audiences may be looking for?
We already have it in our app, actually. We're using it to describe things in journalism. So today is an anniversary of the lunar rover, and you can actually see, in our app now, you can click a button, and on your phone, on the screen, the lunar rover will appear on the carpet in front of you. And you can see it, and you can go walk up to it, and you can walk around it. And we've done that for objects, including a piece of the Berlin Wall, and many other things, to augment our storytelling, as you might do a photograph. Right now we're not going into the big immersive sort of experiences, but just the ability to place a news object on the table or on the carpet in front of you. We had the Tesla 3 was coming out, and we had people putting Tesla 3s in their own driveways, which was pretty interesting. So that we're already doing, and I think that as you can look at a photograph or a video clip, you can also look at a 3D object.
This is a broadcast conference, and so we need to talk about video a little bit. So most of the people on this panel are not broadcasters, but almost everybody is producing video right now. It's kind of an expectation. So how do all of you rate broadcast's ability right now to produce the kind of video that resonates with younger audiences and millennials? Are they speaking the right language visually with the kind of video that they're making, or how do you rank that? Of course, it's a broad question, a lot of broadcast in there, but maybe
they're sitting right in front of us.
They're not listening.
I mean, I would start off by saying it's just wildly variable. I mean, I think that there are some in the broadcast side of the industry who are doing some really innovative work. But I think that, and we even looking internally, we're transforming how we think about video at a place like AP, because a lot of it, some of it is a better fit for how people consume content these days, and some of it is less so, and we're trying to make that transformation. I think it's really variable. I think honestly, there are a couple different sides of it. We think a lot about editing videos differently in new ways, but I think I would not dismiss the importance of thinking differently about how you gather video as well, how you gather footage. One of the things that is very important to us when we're thinking about social and mobile outputs for video is we want to be talking about what kind of output we picture before anybody goes out to shoot anything. Because I think that's really important, because I think the digital side of the news industry, and I'm from a legacy news organization that's working on doing this stuff, so I'm in the same spot in a way. I think in recent years there's been a habit of saying, okay, here's what came in, what can we do to make it digital and engaging? And it's too late. You can do something with that. You can salvage it. But we have a lot of conversations, and it can be the simplest thing, like, do a one-on-one shot in front of a solid background and ask this one question, and then do it again with 5 other people because of some text or graphics we want to put on the screen next to it. Thinking, which it's not foreign thinking to people who have a broadcast background, I don't think, but the details of how you do it might be a little different for digital space, and especially for consumption and on a small screen.
Anybody else besides Scripps, of course? Any broadcasters you might want to highlight?
I'll talk a little bit, just kind of picking up on Eric's points, just about thinking about video differently. We had a story that we did. I keep picking on Sarasota, but that's where my boss is from, so it's good to brag about what he does. Bill Church. So anyways, they do a ton of investigative work, and they did this big piece called Bias on the Bench. If anyone read it, it was about people in Florida being sentenced differently, kind of based on race, and sort of talking through different judges, and tons of data, tons of that's like a hard journalism story. And so they did this video trailer, which they've never, we're terrible at self-promotion. Like, broadcast is probably better at this, but print's like, oh, well, you just have to read the paper. Like, why did you not do that? So, we really have to do a better job of tooting our own horns. So for this, they did this video that was a typewriter showing, like, so-and-so arrested in Florida, age, here's his sentence, and then, like, and here's his race. And then, like, next person, here's his crime, sentence, race, and, like, talking about the timeline with the judges, and just basically, and it had, it was writing, it was like typing out, it was graphics typing out the kind of the lead, but they also had a voiceover. And we shared that on social ahead of time. And that's like and it's a hard news story, but we're telling it in a completely different way that's clearly more engaging. And why is it more engaging? Because if I'm reading this text, I'm going to be like, oh, I'm like really upset now. Like, this is terrible. And you made a connection with the reader from that more socially driven video that I think is kind of less hard news. But you know, you see again and again, people are sharing just their bias stuff or their opinion stuff. People share and spread content based on the emotional connection that they have. So we need to do a better job of not just being this like, we're up here, the authority, but how can we, there's always an emotional connection with the best stories we tell. We just have a hard time, you know, helping our readers to make that leap with us.
That's totally true, and that's something we try to, well, and sort of related to that, another point I wanted to make is that I think there can be a habit when you're, you know, in the old way of thinking, to feel like when you do a video news piece that you need to tell the whole story. And this happens, I mean, when you do this, when you work in text, you have that same habit as well. And I think kind of breaking that down and pulling the story apart brings a lot of potential success. And and there are a few different ways to go. I mean, sometimes, and we found this by doing different types of videos and looking at the results. And if you zoom in on a single character in your story and just do a video piece on that one character, that's going to do better than your comprehensive story. Or if you focus your video on simply explaining some kind of key point that underpins the story, and use data, use some animation if you can, and to just make it explain that. And then think about ways you can package those different things together. I mean, and a lot of times what we'll do on social is we'll have a very specific focused angle that we focus on for the video, and then we can link out to other stuff from there and get people the fuller story. So, you know, it's just trying to get away from the kitchen sink, I think, is really valuable.
There's a common thread running through some of the technology that we've been talking about that for younger consumers, there needs to be an intelligence of some sort present interacting with the audiences, whether it be human or artificial. So again, this question is to any of you. How are your organizations going to be able to provide that and to scale that? Because it's very demanding. And where perhaps can automation of other tasks help you to achieve this at your
I'd like to hear from John on this, because I think it's fascinating what you guys are already doing.
I think in terms of the automation, we're really looking at ways that we can help make bots and even some AI-driven algorithms to help us cover the news. So that may be helping a reporter be alerted either by text or Slack about something that has happened on their beat, or identify trends. I mean, obviously we see Twitter trends and Facebook trends and things like that, so that's all being done. But what about things that are particularly on people's beats? And really it comes down, I think still, frankly, to the reporters being good at their jobs. And if we can help them be better at their jobs by giving them intelligence so they don't have to go checking, you know, the police department's website every day, you have a computer doing some of those things. Augmenting the reporting is, I think, going to be helpful. But when it comes down to it, it's going to be about really good people doing really good work.
AP's been doing this for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
Right?
So we think about automation on two fronts, and one of them is exactly what John's talking about, which is, you know, how can we find ways to increase efficiencies internally, and you know, in some cases, you know, we look for smart opportunities to partner with startups who are doing this work well themselves, who can provide us signals around news and that sort of thing. But then the other thing is, like, you know, as much as possible, look for opportunities to free up time by figuring out, frankly, what the robots can write for us. And we did this in a pretty big way, initially around earnings reports, and some of you may already know about this. So we went from putting out something like 300 earnings reports a quarter written by people to having robots write about 3,000 or 4,000 a quarter. And all of those people have been freed up to do work that they actually enjoy now. Because if anybody's ever written an earnings report story, it's not usually that enjoyable, and it doesn't really require a lot of brain power. One might say it could just be done by a robot, so there you go. The stories have a lower error rate than when people did them, and you can't really tell the difference. They are carefully labeled as coming from an automated system and from and it has the source of data and everything like that. And it works. It's not going to work for everything, but I mean, our business news department now suddenly has all these reporters who are developing their beats and trying to break news, as opposed to trying to do this work all the time. And it's very effective. We've scaled it into sports a little bit too, because just like a lot of people in the room, we're looking to do more with less. I mean, we don't have huge resources, and we're not as big as we once were. But there's still the demand for the content that we produce is still very high, and so we're trying to figure out how we can overall spend less time doing the rote journalism that needs to be done. It's rote without a W, otherwise that was bad grammar. And be able to spend more time trying to A, really break news and build our beats and stuff like that, and B, produce content in new forms that are going to help our customers succeed. So that's that's really worked well for us so far.
I want to go to audience questions in just a moment, leave a couple of minutes for that, but a couple more quick things. Virtual reality was something a couple of years ago. You go to ONA, everybody brought their exciting project that they've been working on. It was thrilling. There was so much energy around it. It seems like that's dissipated somewhat, or maybe the adoption hasn't quite met what we thought it would be. Where are we right now in the state of virtual reality and its prospects for news, and millennial expectation of that?
I think we've been through this kind of arc where everybody got really excited about VR and they were experimenting and doing things that were.
What's that? Gone through the hype phase.
Yeah, and people are very excited about it, and they spent a lot of money trying things, and then there was this important moment, I think it was important, where Facebook and YouTube supported 360 video suddenly, and everybody's like, well, let's just try doing 360 video, which not a bad idea. We did it ourselves for quite a while, and it's a little bit more practical, and in some ways leverages the footprint of a news organization. But then, fast forward another year, and everybody's realizing it's not so easy to make money off of, and there's not really customers for it, and there's not really a big market for it. It's best viewed in these headsets that nobody wants to buy and nobody wants to stick on their face. And my feeling on, to me, it's almost kind of like, 3D movies that kind of been coming and going for 50 years now. And, now there's kind of a niche for them, and they do them sometimes, and that's great. But my feeling is that right now, unless you can get a video game manufacturer interested in buying some news as an add-on for their product, it's going to be hard to find somebody who's willing to pay for this. Because I think gamers are going to put the headset on. And beyond that, until it's in my glasses, right. It's going to be a tough sell.
Until the technology evolves into a contact lens or your glasses, I think.
So these resources are better spent elsewhere at the moment. Yeah. And just last before audience questions, this came up in talking with you, Eric, before this, but I'm interested in everyone weighing in. Younger audiences are sometimes coming from a political perspective to the news very rapidly sometimes. How much is that a facet of what you're working with, and how are you speaking to that dynamic? How are you cultivating that and still managing your journalistic integrity in so doing?
It's a challenging one for us. I mean, some of the newer news organizations just have decided, screw it, we're just going to be political, and they just take a perspective and they encourage their journalists to be open about their politics. It's not going to work for us. It's not going to work for a lot of news organizations, and you have to kind of figure out who you are on that front. But there are still things that can be borrowed from that notion. One that we've decided to focus really heavily on is, it's something that's not new to us, but that we want to make sure people really know we're doing it, is just a really sharp focus on keeping people in power accountable, holding people accountable for the things they say and the things that they do, and being really, really aggressive. Old-fashioned journalism, but I think there's a feeling that more resources need to be moved in that direction, and not necessarily because of any particular administration, although it's been a complicated year, let's say, but just because I think this is something I think younger people who are consuming news don't want you see you dancing around a topic. They want to know, like, what is the truth, and what's your evidence for that? And I think that there's and I think they will get very frustrated if things seem transcriptive.
Do we have any questions for our panel here? I've got a couple more, if not. Yes, sir. We have a mic there.
First of all, I thought that last comment was interesting. I am not from the journalism world, and I'm not sure if kids understand why you would object to having politics in news. That's kind of just an interesting commentary. It just occurred to me, like I have some skill in understanding of journalism. I think just that fact is actually interesting. But I think what's more interesting is we talked about video, and I'm curious what you guys are doing to shorten video, because I think on social, in order for video to take over and have more power, it needs to be shorter. 10 seconds of a politician saying something really important or a credible person. How do we get like shorter bits of video on social to kind of take over the social space?
So I think we're just, you do it by doing it. But I think it partly connects to what I was saying before about thinking about just discrete pieces of a story and not trying to feel like you have to get all the way from Once Upon a Time to the end and oh, here's my video, and now it's 10 minutes long, and what good is that? But the other thing is, one thing we're trying to figure out is better ways to distribute things like this, like a snippet that's just a soundbite like that, because we think that people out in the world there probably want to find ways to assemble things themselves and make their own sort of mashups, and they want the constituent parts, I think.
Yeah, some of our markets are pretty large, like metro areas, but GateHouse has like 450 websites. We've got a lot of small markets where there's no TV station. So we'll just do raw, or we'll do quick stuff. So we really have actually seen a lot of views from very basic video. Like, we're the only reporter on the scene shooting the car crash. Like, we better get some footage of that. And for the most part, readers are not, like, they don't, if it's relevant to, their day-to-day life, they're okay if it's raw. Now audio is a different thing. Bad audio is like really bad. I feel like for podcasts and stuff, you're just like, eh. But video, I feel like if it's relevant and it's raw, we'll put it up quickly, and that's okay. And readers don't really reject that. And then the other piece is finding that one point or emotional connection in the video, as Eric said. That bias on the bench trailer I was talking about, like less than 30 seconds.
Also, I think it's more about right-sizing video and not necessarily always shortening it. It can go too short. You can, I think if you're in a space where your video is being monetized, you're actually maybe better off having it be 90 seconds than 10 seconds. But it just depends on what that space is, and you need to really be thinking about the platform.
I think we can take one more quick question here.
Hi, Janet Gardner. Question goes partially to Eric, John, you as well, from the broadcast side. Eric, you work for a company that has a product on the other side that is a journalist workstation on through. Mm-hmm. What are you seeing, or John, in your world that's really allowing you to do multi-platform storytelling, story-centric news across platforms, manage those resources, manage that integrated storytelling?
So you're talking about ENPS probably, which I have barely ever used, by the way, because that's only used by the broadcast people at AP. Interesting factoid. No, I mean, that has actually been one of the biggest challenges. I actually think it's more of a challenge for us in some ways around workflow than it is around the technology. We've come a long way from a time, I mean, when I've been at AP for almost 18 years now, and when I first got there, the idea was, the idea at that point was like, can we get editors and photo editors to sit in the same room and have a conversation, and that would have been considered a success back then. And I think one approach that we've taken that I think is bearing fruit is we've restructured ourselves to a multi-format structure where if you are the director of a particular region for AP, then you run the text, photo, and video and digital operation for that region, and all of those people report to you. It's a new approach for us, and we still have. It doesn't mean there's not specialization, and because there still is plenty within that. And then there are also sort of off to the side. We have photo editors, we have video production operations, and things like that. But I think the reason that that's important is that goes back to that idea of thinking from the get-go of what your video is going to maybe look like at the end. It means that you're thinking across all of these platforms from the assignment stage, from the very beginning. And it also means that the people who are in those roles, many of them have a TV background. Some of them have a photo background. They have all different backgrounds. You're going to get a much broader range of ideas by having people with different format backgrounds in leadership roles. So I think that's been important.
I would say that we rely on third-party outfits. We just vet them very, very carefully. But probably one of the secrets, the not so secrets at Quartz, is that there are several computer programmers, developers in the newsroom. Some of them are journalist reporters who are using computer programming to do their work. Some of them are product developers, people coding things. I code on a daily basis to play with these chatbots and other things. And that is a different environment. It is really different. You have people who know how to handle data, who play with data, and who know how to make things quickly so that other people can do it. And there's something really interesting about a news organization's group of computer programmers, is that you're also dealing with people who are aware of an audience and aware of a user and are thinking about usability. So it's not just people in the back room going, hey, we're doing our computing and here's the result. There are people who are very conscious about that, oh, a reporter is going to need to use this, or a reader is going to need to use this, or an editor is going to need to use this. And that changes the dynamic completely, and I think it gives us a big advantage.
And we are out of time, so thank you all so much. It's a fascinating discussion.